Why was she standing alone at the edge of the formation, when every other candidate pressed in close, jockeying for position, desperate to be noticed? The morning sun stretched long shadows across the naval training facility, heat already rising off the asphalt as the recruits shifted under the weight of anticipation. Admiral Cain stepped out of his black SUV and the crowd stiffened, silent. To most, he was a legend 28 years in the SEALs, the kind of man whose scars told stories no briefing could. But his eyes, gray and hard as steel, drifted past the boasting, muscle-bound hopefuls and locked on her. Sarah Mitchell, auburn hair tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail, green eyes, steady and watchful. She carried herself differently, not the swagger of men who had something to prove, but the quiet focus of someone who had already made her choice long before this morning. She hadn't slept. She'd driven 12 hours straight from Montana, leaving behind the empty ranch house and the ghosts that lingered there. She told no one she was coming. No family goodbyes, no friends to cheer her on. Just a duffel bag, worn boots, and the steady fire that had burned inside her since she was a child. The other recruits noticed her, of course. How could they not? Some whispered, others smirked. The looks were familiar, the dismissal, the disbelief, the certainty that she'd fail before the real training even started. She didn't answer them. She'd long since learned that silence was sharper than any comeback. But Cain kept watching. During the initial assessments, she didn't outmuscle anyone. She didn't need to. Push-ups, runs, swims, she moved with efficient rhythm, conserving energy where others burned out. Her pace was steady, her form exact, her breathing even. When the bigger men began to cheat their counts, Cain saw her refuse the easy way out. Every rep counted. Every inch mattered. And then came the rifle test. The range roared with noise as the recruits picked up their weapons. Bravado filled the air, hunting stories, deployment tales, big talk about kill shots and combat. Sarah said nothing. She just checked her M4, adjusted her stance, and studied the wind. When the command to fire rang out, chaos followed. Bullets sprayed wild across the targets, magazines emptied in seconds, smoke rising thick as the instructors shouted for order. But not from her. One shot, pause, adjust, another shot. She fired like someone who wasn't racing against the clock, but against her own standard. Her rifle barely moved. Her breathing never changed. Cain leaned forward. When the ceasefire was called and the targets reeled back, the truth was impossible to ignore. Scattered holes marked the papers of the loudest recruits, some targets hardly touched at all. A few managed rough groupings. But Sarah, every bullet dead center. Holes overlapping so tightly it looked like the paper had been punched by a single shot. The range instructor, a grizzled sergeant who thought he'd seen everything, just stared. Cain walked closer. In 28 years, he'd rarely seen such raw precision. Not from veterans. Certainly not from an untested recruit. Sarah was already cleaning her rifle, eyes calm, expression unchanged. As if this was nothing. As if she hadn't just shifted the entire gravity of the room. The others noticed now, some impressed, some unsettled, and some threatened. It didn't take long for the whispers to harden into open resentment. By the second week, when fatigue had stripped away facades, they pushed harder not just through training but against her. Sarcasm on the runs. Doubts spoken loud enough to hear. One candidate, Rodriguez, a former college football star, didn't bother hiding it. He said flat out, "Standards are lower if she makes it through." Cain heard it, Sarah did too. The breaking point came during the obstacle course. Full combat gear, walls, barriers, ropes that tore palms raw. Rodriguez hit the rope wall first, muscles straining as he heaved himself up. Halfway, his arms gave out, grip sliding, feet kicking uselessly. Sarah arrived seconds later. She could have climbed past him, left him to fail, let him wash out with the others who couldn't keep up. It would have been easy, maybe even fair. Instead, she stopped. Her voice rose, calm but firm, coaching him through the technique. Use your legs more, hook the rope, Conserve your arms." Rodriguez looked down, stunned, but obeyed. She showed him step by step, pausing in her own climb until he steadied. And then, side by side, they reached the top. Admiral Cain watched silently from above. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. He'd seen what mattered. Respect isn't given by yelling. It's earned by steady hands when others fall. Word spread through the camp, not just about her aim, but about her choice. And though the resentment didn't vanish, something shifted. Even Rodriguez, whose pride had been her loudest critic, began to watch her differently. Nights blurred into mornings, fatigue into drills. The training stripped them bare. Some cracked, some quit. Sarah did neither. But she wasn't untouched. Alone in her bunk at night, when the camp finally fell quiet, she thought about home, about the silence of the Montana ranch, about her father's voice teaching her to shoot at tin cans lined along a fence. Precision over speed, patience over panic. His lessons lived in her hands even after he was gone, especially after he was gone. Sometimes she wondered if this, the exhaustion, the scrutiny, the unspoken weight of being the only one like her, was strength or stubbornness. The line blurred more each day. The night navigation exercise almost broke them. Faulty GPS, dense forest. The team turned on itself, panic rising as minutes drained from the clock. Failure would end the road for all of them. Sarah sat quietly, studying the stars through breaks in the canopy. Polaris, Orion. She remembered those nights in Montana when her father had pointed out constellations, teaching her how to navigate without tools, just the sky. She didn't argue, she didn't announce herself. She just started walking. At first, reluctantly, they followed. By the end, they moved as if her quiet certainty was the only anchor they had left. They reached the checkpoint with minutes to spare. It wasn't her accuracy or endurance that impressed Cain most that night. It was her silence. She didn't demand leadership. She just walked toward it, and others couldn't help but fall in line. But then came the exercise no one had yet passed. Urban mock-up, hostage scenario, targets armed, civilians placed throughout, split-second decisions. 6 enemy silhouettes appeared at once, windows, doorways, rifles raised. Every recruit froze, too many angles, too much risk. One wrong shot meant hitting a civilian. She didn't freeze. 6 shots in under 3 seconds, each one deliberate, each one lethal. When the smoke cleared, the hostages stood untouched, every target neutralized. The silence in the control room was thicker than the smoke. Cain and the senior officers exchanged glances but said nothing. There were no words for what they'd just seen. On the floor, her teammates erupted in cheers. Even Rodriguez shouted. But Sarah, she didn't celebrate. She just checked her rifle, eyes calm, shoulders squared, ready for whatever came next. Later that night, Cain replayed the footage. Over and over. 6 targets, 6 shots, no hesitation, no collateral. He'd seen men with decades of combat miss under pressure far less complex. And yet here she was, a ranch girl from Montana who carried grief like a second weapon and wore silence like armor, cutting through doubt with every action. Still, Cain knew, training was one thing, war was another. The real test had yet to come. Why had Admiral Cain broken protocol to make her team leader? The candidates sat around a long table in the briefing room, maps spread wide, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Most of them looked confused, others annoyed. Team leader was a position given to the loudest, the most experienced, the men who carried themselves like they'd already earned the Trident. Instead, Cain had called her name, Sarah Mitchell. She felt every stare, some sharp, some curious. Even Rodriguez, who had begun to respect her since the rope climb incident, looked hesitant. It wasn't fair to him or anyone else. They had years of experience, she didn't. She was still just the outsider, the exception, the woman. Cain didn't flinch when the murmurs rose. His voice cut through the room like a blade. She's leading this up, you'll follow. No explanation, no debate. Sarah leaned over the maps, steadying her breathing. The details were deliberately harsh. Captured officers inside a compound. Hostile patrols everywhere. No clean approach. The instructors had modeled the exercise after a real mission Cain himself had led years before, a mission that had cost lives. She studied everything carefully, asking quiet questions. Terrain, escape routes, how many floors the building had, where sightlines overlapped. She wasn't trying to impress, she was trying to see. Rodriguez sat beside her, arms crossed, but his eyes softened as she pressed for details others overlooked. For once, she wasn't dismissed. For once, they listened. At 300 hours under moonless skies, they moved out. Helicopter blades churned above, then silence swallowed them as boots hit the earth. The forest was wet and close, branches brushing against their faces as they pushed forward. The team spread into formation, rifles raised, Sarah at point. She felt the weight instantly. This wasn't like moving alone. Every step was a decision that risked more than her life. 4 men shadowed her now, and if she misjudged, their blood would be on her hands. An hour in, the first problem appeared. A patrol where none was supposed to be. 5 men with radios, weapons slung, moving in patterns that didn't fit the briefing. Cain had lied to them, or worse, the intel was wrong. Her pulse ticked faster. They were supposed to be invisible, but if these men made a call, the mission would collapse before it started. She could feel her team waiting tense, expecting her to crack. She crouched low, studying the angles, their path, their spacing. If even one raised a shout, they'd all be done. Hand signals, quiet, precise. Each man in her team moved into place, though some with hesitation. Sarah positioned herself where she could cover the widest arc. The first shot had to be silent, the others had to be instant. When her hand dropped, the forest erupted. Suppressed fire snapped in the dark. 5 bodies fell almost in unison. The final shot, hers, dropped the patrol leader before his finger could hit the radio. Seconds of silence followed, then breathing, heavy, shaken. Rodriguez looked at her differently then. Not like she was a burden, but like she had just saved them all. They pressed on. The compound rose out of the trees hours later. A squat concrete block, floodlights sweeping across barren ground. Open approaches meant death. The intel said hostages were on the 2nd floor, but something about the placement of guards gnawed at her. Too obvious, too predictable. She studied the terrain, scanning for weaknesses. That was when she saw it, a drainage culvert cutting beneath the outer wall, half choked with mud and water. It wasn't on the maps. Maybe no one else noticed, but she did. Her voice was low, almost apologetic. "We go under." Rodriguez grimaced but nodded. The others followed, crawling through mud so cold it cut to the bone. Sarah went first, rifle strapped across her back, the weight pressing her down as water soaked her uniform. It smelled of rust and decay, but it brought them where they needed to be, feet from the enemy's blind side. When they emerged, dripping and shivering, she raised her hand once more. The assault began. Her shots were precise, surgical. Guards dropped before alarms could sound. Inside, hallways choked with gunfire. Her team stumbled, fired, advanced. And she led, not shouting orders but steady, composed, her decisions made in the sliver of a second where hesitation meant death. The room they were supposed to reach, the hostages inside, was locked and guarded. She motioned for a breach. The charge blew, smoke curling. They poured in. But the room was empty. Empty except for the wires running along the walls, the explosives rigged to detonate the moment the door swung wide. If she had trusted the intel, if she had rushed them inside, the entire team would have been gone. Her chest tightened. Sweat stung her eyes. The others looked at her, confused, scared. She thought of her father then, of the times he had told her to trust her gut when the shot didn't feel right. If something's wrong, it is. She scanned again. The signs were there, too neat, too deliberate. She remembered the basement entry they hadn't checked. Without explaining, she motioned them to follow. down narrow stairs into damp stone, and there, bound and bloodied, were the hostages, two instructors role-playing, eyes wide with shock that she'd found them at all. Cain watched from the control room, his face unreadable. The withdrawal tested them more than the entry. Hostages slowed them down. Enemy resistance grew thicker, more desperate. Sarah coordinated the retreat, shifting fire patterns, covering every angle, stepping between danger and the men dragging the prisoners out. By the time they reached the extraction point, dawn was breaking pale across the treetops. The helicopter blades thundered overhead as they lifted away, exhausted, muddy, shaken, but alive. Cain stood waiting. He didn't congratulate her. He didn't smile. But the way he studied her, silent and intent, said everything. She had led them into a trap through chaos and still brought them out. It wasn't just her aim anymore. It wasn't just her silence. It was her ability to carry the weight. That night, alone in her bunk, Sarah didn't feel victorious. She felt hollow. She replayed every choice, every breath, every step where hesitation could have cost them everything. She thought about the faces of her team, the fear in their eyes when the room exploded empty. Command wasn't about glory. It was about carrying responsibility that never left you. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come. Cain in his office replayed the mission footage again and again. He saw the precision, the decisions, the instinct that had saved lives, and he knew. Sarah Mitchell was no ordinary candidate. But there was something he hadn't told her. Not yet. Why did Admiral Cain keep replaying her footage when the rest of the instructors had already moved on? The candidates didn't know. They only noticed that Cain's gray eyes lingered on her longer than anyone else. They thought maybe it was politics or curiosity or doubt, but it was calculation. Cain had led men in wars they couldn't even name. He had buried too many who had cracked under pressure they swore they could handle. He had seen brilliance collapse the first time real chaos intruded. And though Sarah Mitchell had passed every test so far, he knew skill wasn't the true measure. Judgment was. And judgment only revealed itself under impossible conditions. So he designed something special. Sarah was told she'd be doing an advanced marksmanship exercise. Nothing unusual on the surface, just another range, another rifle, another sequence of targets. She nodded when the assignment came down, methodical as ever. She cleaned her weapon, checked her gear, moved without fuss. But Cain had layered the course with traps, moving silhouettes, civilian mannequins mixed among armed targets, time pressure, hidden speakers ready to unleash the deafening confusion of simulated combat. He wanted to see if she broke, or worse, if she hesitated. The morning of the test, the range looked like a small urban district. Windows, rooftops, cars burned out and gutted, shadows where enemies could appear. She set up her position with the same quiet thoroughness he'd come to expect. No wasted movements, no bravado. Her first shots were textbook. She adjusted for wind, compensated for distance, squeezed the trigger cleanly. Targets dropped in sequence, one after another like dominoes falling. The instructors exchanged glances, impressed but unsurprised. They'd seen her shoot before. That was when Cain flipped the switch. The speakers erupted. Gunfire, explosions, screams in foreign languages, the sound of radios barking orders, the chaos of a battlefield pouring over her like a wave. Simultaneously, new targets appeared, mannequins of civilians staggering into the open, some clutching children, others panicked. Armed silhouettes followed, weaving between them. The exercise no longer looked like a range. It looked like war. Sarah froze for half a breath, not from fear but from the weight of choice. Cain leaned forward. Here it comes, he thought, here, where she either loses her edge or shows it's real. Her breathing steadied. She scanned fast, eyes tracking every movement. One shot clean, an armed man fell without the mannequin beside him so much as flinching. Another shot, quick adjustment, target down, child untouched. The other instructors muttered under their breath, "Too fast, too precise, no wasted rounds." Cain said nothing. Then he escalated again. Targets began to move unpredictably, ducking behind cover, weaving through crowds. Over the speakers, a voice announced, 60 seconds, complete the objective or fail. Time pressure, noise, impossible angles. Most men would have panicked, rushed shots, missed, hit civilians, failed. But she didn't. Something in her shifted, not frantic, not wild, but sharper, like the world had slowed for her alone. She tracked the patterns of movement, predicted where each target would emerge, timed her shots so each one landed exactly where it had to. Bang, enemy down. Bang, another. Bang, a moving silhouette dropped mid-step. Her rifle cracked again and again, until the last target fell and the timer buzzed. Cain exhaled, realizing only then that he'd been holding his breath. But the test wasn't over. As Sarah lowered her weapon, thinking it was finished, a new set of silhouettes rose. This time, a hostage scene. Civilians pressed close to armed targets, some in front, some used as shields. A deliberate nightmare. Cain had seen seasoned snipers crumble at this. Sarah studied the scene, jaw tightening. The pause was longer this time, not from confusion but from conscience. Her first shot was deliberate. She didn't go for the nearest man. She went for the one whose position endangered the most hostages. One bullet. He dropped, leaving 2 civilians free to dive for cover. Her second shot chained to the first, cutting down another gunman before he could react. Each trigger pull wasn't just a kill, it was a choice about who lived. The final target was the worst. Hostage held directly in front, body trembling, head ducked. Only fractions of the enemy's face showed. The kind of shot where an inch of error meant blood on her conscience forever. She shifted, adjusted, waited. Cain could see the restraint in her hands, the refusal to rush. She tracked the enemy's movement until in one fleeting instant his face cleared. Bang! He dropped. The hostage collapsed alive, sobbing. Silence fell across the range. Sarah lowered her rifle, breathing steady, but her eyes betrayed her. For the first time, Cain saw the weight pressing in. She had carried the choice, carried the judgment, carried the knowledge that in a real firefight those faces wouldn't be mannequins. Cain stepped forward, the other officers behind him still stunned. In almost 3 decades, he had never seen anything like it. Not the accuracy, though that was astonishing, but the calm moral gravity in her choices. Sarah didn't celebrate, didn't even smile. She just asked softly, "Was that acceptable?" Cain didn't answer right away. He was too busy wondering what it meant that a ranch girl from Montana had just outshot the best snipers he'd ever trained, and carried herself like she didn't want the credit. That night, Sarah sat alone, cleaning her weapon. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory drilled from years at her father's side. But her mind wasn't calm. She kept seeing the mannequin hostages, the look of their faces frozen in terror. She kept wondering how it would feel when they weren't mannequins. Because she knew now, with chilling certainty, that day was coming. And Admiral Cain knew too. Why would Admiral Cain risk his reputation by putting an untested recruit on a real mission? Even Sarah didn't know. She'd heard whispers, meetings at the Pentagon, calls coming down from higher than the SEAL command usually reached. She ignored them, kept her head down, kept training. But one night, Cain summoned her. His voice was flat, unreadable. "You're deploying." The CIA had lost contact with an undercover officer in Eastern Europe. 3 years embedded inside a weapons trafficking network, and then silence. Other teams had failed to reach him. Too many patrols, too much surveillance. The agency wanted SEALs, but Cain wanted her. The briefing was cold, clinical. Maps of an industrial compound near the Ukrainian border, guard towers, floodlights, checkpoints thick as scars across the landscape. Inside, Marcus Vyulov, a Russian-American operative who'd gone dark. If he was alive, they had to bring him out. Sarah's role was sniper overwatch, 2 miles out alone, covering the team's insertion and extraction. Commander James Peterson, a 15-year veteran, made his objection clear in the room. She doesn't have combat hours. If she misses, we die. If she's spotted, she dies. This isn't training. Cain didn't flinch. She's ready. Sarah sat quietly, eyes lowered, the weight of their stares pressing heavy. She wanted to speak, to tell Peterson she wasn't here to be a risk, but her voice stayed locked. Instead, she listened, took notes, memorized terrain lines until they burned into her mind. Peterson didn't soften until the planning sessions. She asked questions others hadn't. What if the patrols moved irregularly? What if the hostage was relocated underground? What if the exfil point was compromised? Her voice was steady, her eyes on the maps, not on the men. And slowly, Peterson began to hear not a recruit but a strategist. The mission launched on a moonless night. Helicopter blades beat against the Polish sky, dropping them 50 miles out. The forest was dense, damp, clawing at their gear as they moved. Sarah split off early, her pack heavier than the others, weighed down with rifle, optics, rations, survival gear. She didn't complain. She just walked. Her destination, a jagged outcropping of rock overlooking the compound. She crawled into position before dawn, mud staining her uniform, fingers numb as she assembled her weapon. Through her scope, the world shrank, towers, walls, guards smoking cigarettes on their patrols. She marked each one, her breathing synced with the rhythm of her pulse. Peterson's team moved in the dark opposite her position, shadows against shadows. She watched their silhouettes until they disappeared behind cover. At 2,000 hours, she began. Her first shot was clean, silent. A tower guard slumped, his rifle clattering. She didn't linger, shifted, adjusted, fired again. Another fell, this one half concealed behind sandbags. Her third shot hit before the compound even knew what direction death was coming from. Alarms blared. Floodlights swung toward her side of the perimeter. Sarah kept firing, her sequence deliberate, designed to mimic an entire squad assaulting from her direction. The guards scrambled, shouts echoing, defenses reoriented to the wrong flank. And just like that, Peterson's team slipped in unnoticed. Her heart pounded, but she never lost her rhythm. Every time her finger squeezed the trigger, she remembered her father's voice, patience over panic, precision over pride. Then the firefight erupted inside the compound. Flashes lit the windows. Muffled bursts echoed up through her scope. She adjusted elevation, searching. And then she saw them, Peterson's team pinned behind a wall, enemy forces firing from covered positions, angles that her men couldn't reach. She had shots, but they were hellishly tight. Friendly forces moved in her scope, their helmets barely feet from hostile muzzles. One mistake and she'd put a bullet in her own team. Her chest clenched. She forced her breath slow, chose her angle. Bang, one hostile down. Bang, another collapsed. Bang, the third mid-reload fell backward. Peterson's men surged forward, freed. But the danger wasn't over. Through her scope, she saw a figure dragged from a basement, Marcus Vulov. Limp, wounded, blood matting his shirt. They had him. Alive. Barely. The exfil began. Slower now, burdened with a man who couldn't run. Sarah's rifle barked, each shot carving a path clear, each decision weighed against the risk of exposing her position. Enemy searchlights swept dangerously close to her perch. For a moment she thought she'd been seen. She melted back, heart hammering, breath shallow, waiting. No alarms, no bullets. She crawled forward again, eyes back in her scope. Peterson's voice crackled low over comms. Extraction point in sight. Cover us. She fired until her rifle was nearly empty. Guards fell. Patrols scattered. The team reached the clearing where the helicopter hovered low, blades chopping the night air. The bird lifted, carrying them away, carrying him away, carrying her silence with it. Sarah remained behind, watching the compound shrink into darkness. Only when the last echo faded did she dismantle her rifle, pack her gear, and begin the long, lonely walk to the secondary pickup point. When she finally boarded the chopper hours later, Peterson met her eyes for the first time without skepticism. His voice was simple, direct. "We'd have been dead without you." She didn't answer, just sat down, mud-stained, trembling from exhaustion she wouldn't show. Cain received the after-action report the next morning. Peterson's words were uncharacteristically absolute. Her performance exceeded operators with years of combat experience. She was essential. Cain read it twice, then leaned back in his chair. The proof he'd been waiting for had arrived. But for Sarah, the mission left no triumph. Alone in her bunk, she scrubbed her hands raw in the sink, the smell of gunpowder and iron clinging no matter how hard she tried. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the hostage mannequins from the range. Only now they had Marcus Vulov's face. And for the first time, she wondered if carrying this weight was something she truly wanted, or something she couldn't escape. Why was her name suddenly echoing in corridors she'd never walked? Sarah didn't know. She only felt the shift when she returned to the training facility. Eyes lingered longer. Conversations stopped when she entered the room. Candidates who once mocked her now stared with something closer to awe or envy. The Eastern European mission had been classified, but word always slipped. Instructors knew, operators whispered, rumors spread like wildfire. She went solo over watch. 2 miles out, she cleared their exfil. Peterson vouched for her. Peterson. Sarah hated it. She hadn't done it for stories. She hadn't done it for applause. And now the silence she once carried like armor felt heavier because it was no longer anonymity, it was scrutiny. Cain saw it too. He knew the mission's success was both blessing and curse. The proof of her ability had reached ears far above his, but those same ears carried agendas, doubts, politics. Within 48 hours, Cain was on secure calls with Pentagon brass. Video conferences where Sarah's name was dissected like a policy decision, not a human being. She's untested in multiple theaters. She skipped years of experience. This is precedent we can't manage. And then the other side. She's the example we've been waiting for. She proves capability transcends tradition. She's the face of a new era. Cain said little in those debates. He knew noise diluted truth. When asked directly, his response was steady, deliberate. In 28 years, I've never seen judgment and precision combine like this. The question isn't whether she's ready. The question is whether you're willing to recognize it. It wasn't enough. The decision escalated to commanders, to chiefs of staff, to generals who didn't know Sarah's face but felt the weight of her existence. For some, she was opportunity. For others, threat. Sarah knew none of this. All she knew was that the camaraderie she'd built in training had grown brittle. The men who once bled beside her now hesitated before laughing in her presence. Was she still one of them? Or was she already something separate? Rodriguez tried to bridge it. He clapped her shoulder one evening after drills. "Doesn't matter what they say, you've earned it." She nodded, but his words didn't quiet the unease. Because in her mind, she hadn't earned anything. She'd just done what she had to do. The Pentagon debate reached its climax in a secure room lined with screens. Generals, admirals, civilian officials who shaped policy with pens sharper than knives. Cain presented footage from her exercises, reports from her missions, Peterson's personal recommendation. General Patricia Morrison, first woman to serve as Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, leaned forward. "Admiral Cain, you're asking us to approve a recommendation with no precedent in special operations. What makes you certain she's ready?" Cain didn't blink. "Because I've seen her under fire. I've seen her decide between killing and saving. I've seen her lead when every path was wrong. And I've seen her walk away without asking for recognition. She doesn't chase this. That's why she deserves it." The room quieted. For a moment, even policy couldn't argue with truth. But the decision was larger than her, larger than Cain, larger even than the SEALs. Hours of debate, tradition against change, fear against vision. Finally, Admiral William Hayes, commander of Naval Special Warfare, spoke the words that tipped the scale. We are not lowering standards. We are recognizing when someone meets and exceeds them. Candidate Mitchell has done what most of us thought impossible. The system should adapt to her, not force her to adapt to a system built for less. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. Sarah Mitchell would be fast-tracked. The decision would remain classified. To protect her, to protect the process, to protect the institution from tearing itself apart. Cain told her privately, just the two of them in a quiet corner of the compound, the hum of generators in the background. You'll finish early. You'll deploy faster than anyone before you. Her reaction was understated as always, a nod, then questions, what responsibilities, what expectations, what cost? Cain studied her, this young woman who had gone from the ranch to the razor's edge of history in less than a year, and wondered if she understood the storm gathering around her name. The final phase of her training wasn't like the others. No more obstacle courses or timed runs. This was the hidden world, advanced technologies, classified weapons, tactics whispered only in closed rooms. She absorbed it like water sinking into dry earth, not with arrogance, with hunger. Her instructors, men who had shaped the most elite operators alive, returned again and again to the same remark. She doesn't just adapt, she masters. But Sarah herself didn't feel mastery. She felt weight. Each new weapon in her hands felt heavier than the last, not because of the metal, but because of the lives it might one day decide. The graduation was private. No cheering crowds, no staged photos, just Cain, Peterson, and a handful of officers who had seen her journey. The Trident was pinned to her chest. Cain's words were brief, his voice low. You carry this for those who never could. She nodded, but her mind was already on what came next. Her assignment, SEAL Team 6. Unprecedented, unthinkable, but sealed in orders stamped with signatures that silenced every objection. When she walked into the team's space for the first time, the air was thick with skepticism. Operators with scars deeper than her years measured her with hard eyes, some hostile, some curious, none welcoming. She didn't expect them to be. Respect wasn't given here. It was earned in the field or not at all. Peterson stood at the front, arms crossed. His voice was flat. You all know who she is. You all know why she's here. Don't care about politics. Don't care about opinions. Out there, you'll trust her or you'll die. That's the only rule. Sarah felt every eye on her. She kept her face steady, her hands still. Inside, a flicker of doubt. Could she? Could they? That night, lying in the barracks with the hum of the team's quiet conversations around her, she closed her eyes. She thought of Montana, of stars that guided her when maps failed, of her father's voice. And she whispered to herself, just once, into the dark. Don't break. Why did the room fall silent when she walked in? Sarah felt it immediately. The operators of SEAL Team 6 were men whose reputations had been forged in shadows, their records sealed by classified ink. They weren't impressed by medals or stories or politics, and now one of them had to share space with her. The air was thick, not with hostility but with skepticism. These were warriors who had fought and bled together for years. To them, she was an outsider who hadn't earned her scars. Not yet. Peterson broke the silence. This is Mitchell. You've all read the file. I don't care what you think about it. Out there, she either has your back or you die. That's the rule. Clear. No one answered, but the silence said enough. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She only nodded as if the burden was hers to carry quietly. The first week was hell by design. Team integration wasn't about drills. It was about friction, pressure, and trust built through near-breaking points. They ran insertion exercises on 3 hours of sleep, fast-roping from helicopters into mock compounds, moving under simulated fire with seconds to decide who lived and who didn't. Her role was overwatch, sniper support, from rooftops, from ridges, from concealed alleys. It meant her decisions had to be perfect, because the operators inside buildings were trusting her to cut down threats they couldn't see. The first exercise was deliberately brutal, a hostage rescue scenario inside a mock urban block designed to overwhelm even veterans. The team split, entry operators moving inside. Sarah set up on a high perch with her rifle. Her instructions: neutralize only those targets that endangered the team directly. No misses, no civilians. Her scope came alive with chaos. Shadows darted through windows. Team members kicked through doors below, gunfire rattling walls. She tracked fast one hostile on a balcony lining up a shot. She squeezed. He dropped. Another partially concealed behind glass, angled toward the stairwell where Tors, the veteran sergeant major, moved. She timed the shot between his steps, glass shattering, hostile down. Every shot had to sync with the rhythm of her team's advance. Too soon and she risked friendly fire. Too late and they paid the price. By the end, her rifle was hot, her breathing shallow, but the entry team cleared the building with no simulated casualties. The instructors debriefed, listing errors, timing lapses, but none of them came from her. Still, the room was quiet. Operators glanced at her, unreadable. Respect wasn't granted after one success. Not here. The next exercise was worse. Simulated combat in dense woodland, with the team divided into 2 squads. Sarah was attached to Tor's group, the most skeptical of her presence. His silence was harsher than words, his eyes heavy whenever they crossed. The scenario turned fast. Their squad walked into an ambush, paint rounds snapping from hidden positions. Chaos erupted. The team scattered for cover, pinned under crossfire. Sarah hit the dirt, rifle already finding angles. She spotted 3 silhouettes firing from high ground. Timing her breath, she fired 1, 2, 3. Paint rounds marked them down. Tors glanced at her just briefly, his face unreadable. The team regrouped, pushing forward. She followed their rhythm, not leading, not dominating, just weaving her precision into their advance like an invisible thread holding them together. By the end, when they stormed the final position, Tors barked into comms, "Clear, good work." And though he didn't say her name, Sarah felt the shift. That night, the team debriefed in the dim glow of the command tent. Operators offered feedback, sharp and blunt. When it came to her, Tors spoke with the same directness he carried into every fight. "I don't care what politics got her here. She did her job, she did it well, and I'd trust her to cover me again." Silence followed, not disbelief, not resistance, just the first fragile thread of acceptance. For Sarah, it wasn't victory, it was survival. Because alone in her bunk later, the weight returned. Every shot she'd fired had been simulation, paint rounds, paper targets, but the muscle memory would carry into war, and when it did, those silhouettes wouldn't stand up after being hit. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if trust would feel heavier in combat than it did here. Days bled into weeks. The exercises grew harsher. Nighttime insertions, shipboard assaults, room-clearing drills where the margin for error was less than a second. Each time, Sarah proved herself steady, not flawless but adaptable, calm. And slowly, resistance softened. The glances weren't as sharp. The silences weren't as hostile. The team began to speak to her as one of them, clipped, professional, equal. Cain received Peterson's report after the final exercise of the cycle. His voice was simple, steady. "She's integrated. They trust her." Cain closed the file and sat back in his chair, staring out the window at the training grounds. He thought of that first morning, her standing alone at the edge of the group, ignored, dismissed, written off before she fired a single shot. And now, months later, she had crossed a line almost no one believed she could. But Cain knew. The training ground was only prelude. The real test waited beyond the horizon, where trust and skill met chaos, and no exercise could prepare them for what followed. And Sarah knew it too. She whispered to herself again in the dark that night, as she had before. "Don't break." But this time the voice trembled. Why was the flight so quiet? Sarah sat against the vibrating fuselage of the transport aircraft, helmet resting on her knee, rifle secured at her side. Around her, the men of SEAL Team 6 were silent. No jokes, no banter, just focus. This wasn't training, this wasn't simulation, this was war. The mission brief was simple on paper, brutal in reality. A terror cell had fortified a compound deep in the Horn of Africa. Intelligence suggested they were planning a coordinated strike against civilian targets across multiple countries. Capture if possible, kill if necessary. Sarah's role was Overwatch just as it had been in training. But this time, her shots would be real. Her margin for error was life or death, not mannequins, not paint rounds. Peterson sat across from her, his face steady but harder than usual. Before the flight, he'd pulled her aside. His words weren't gentle. "They're still not sure about you. Out there, you'll decide if they trust you or not. Don't hesitate, don't miss." She hadn't answered. Words meant little now, only actions would. The insertion was a ghost's walk. Low-flying helicopters skimming the desert until their rotors blended with the night wind. The team split, assault squad approaching from the south, Sarah moving with tours to a ridge overlooking the compound. The desert was cold, biting through her uniform, the ground crunching softly beneath her crawl. She reached her position, dug into the sand, assembled her rifle with steady hands. Through her scope, the world narrowed. The compound glowed with dim lantern light. Guards patrolled lazily, their rifles slung without discipline. Shadows moved behind thin curtains inside. She adjusted her optics, marking targets, measuring distance, calculating angles. Her comms crackled softly. "Team Alpha in position. Go on my mark." Peterson's voice, calm, controlled, the kind of calm that came only from years of walking into death and walking back out. The mark came. Gunfire erupted below. Shadows stormed through the compound's gates, night vision goggles glowing faintly. Shouts, screams, the crash of doors splintering. Sarah's scope snapped to a tower guard swinging his weapon toward the entry squad. She fired. He dropped before his finger touched the trigger. Another sprinted across the courtyard. She tracked him, squeezed, down. Her comms hissed with clipped calls, clear, moving, contact left. Her rifle answered each one with precision. And then chaos. A second wave of hostiles poured from a hidden bunker, RPGs slung, firing wildly into the night. One missile streaked toward the compound wall where Peterson's men breached. The explosion ripped the air, dust, and flame engulfing the entrance. Through the haze, Sarah spotted movement, hostiles lining up for a second rocket. Her heart slammed. She adjusted elevation, exhaled, fired. The man collapsed. She cycled the bolt, fired again. Another fell. Her shots bought seconds, just seconds, but seconds meant survival. Tor's voice cut in over comms, low and sharp. "Mitchell's keeping us alive. Hold the line." The words hit harder than the recoil. Not praise, not softness, just truth spoken under fire. But the fight wasn't done. Inside the compound, civilians were discovered, women and children, locked in a back room. Human shields. Exactly the nightmare Sarah had faced in training. Her comms carried Peterson's voice, tense now. "Overwatch, confirm. Hostiles mixing with non-combatants. Can you take them?" Her scope settled. She saw them, armed men dragging terrified civilians in front of them, using their bodies as shields. The women's faces twisted in terror, children clinging to their arms. The angles were impossible. A wrong shot would spill innocent blood. Her chest tightened, her finger hovered. The seconds stretched. She thought of the mannequins, the hollow eyes, the shots she'd taken on the range, but this time the eyes weren't painted, they were alive. She whispered to herself, barely audible, precision over pride. She waited, tracking the enemy's movement, breathing slow despite the roar in her ears. And then, the gap. A face exposed for just an instant. Bang! One hostile dropped. The hostage collapsed alive. Bang! Another. The third spun, weapon raised, dragging a child in front of him. Sarah froze. The scope trembled with her heartbeat. Then Tor's voice cut through. "You've got him, take it." She steadied, exhaled, squeezed. Bang! The man fell. The child stumbled free, sobbing. Silence filled her headset for a breathless moment. Then Peterson's voice, firm, "Hostages secure, moving to exfil." The words hit like oxygen. Relief rushed through her, but she buried it fast. The mission wasn't over until they were gone. She covered the team's retreat, her rifle cracking methodically, clearing their path to the extraction zone. The helicopters roared in, dust storms whipping the night. The team loaded, civilians huddled inside, operators slamming into their seats. Tors pulled her up the ramp last. His hand gripped her shoulder hard, grounding her against the chaos. His eyes met hers, not soft, not smiling, but something different. Recognition. "Good shooting," he said. She nodded once, unable to speak. The flight back was the same silence as before, but it wasn't the silence of doubt. It was the silence of men who had walked the line and returned. Back at base, the debrief was clipped, clinical. Objectives achieved, civilians saved, 0 team casualties, command satisfied. But Sarah sat alone after, cleaning her rifle, hands shaking slightly as they moved. She had done it. She had pulled the trigger when it mattered. But her chest still carried the weight of the faces in her scope, the tremor in that child's shoulders when freedom came at the cost of a man's life. She whispered again into the dark, to no one but herself. "Don't break." And for the first time, she wondered if repeating it was the only thing keeping her whole. Why did Admiral Cain sit alone in the observation room that night? The mission reports were already filed, the Pentagon satisfied, the brass whispering louder than ever about the woman who had just done what even seasoned men sometimes failed to do. But Cain wasn't celebrating. He was waiting, watching. Because he knew skill was only the beginning. The question was whether she could carry the weight that followed. Sarah sat on her bunk, rifle cleaned, gear stowed, uniform still smelling faintly of desert dust and cordite. Around her, the barracks was alive with low murmurs, the team's laughter soft, restrained. She heard her name once, twice, spoken without edge this time. But she didn't turn. She was still seeing the faces. That child, those hostages, the split second where a wrong decision would have turned triumph into tragedy. She replayed it again and again. Each time her finger hovering on the trigger, her breath frozen. Each time the same whisper, "Don't break." Tors noticed. He always noticed. Later that night he found her outside, sitting against the concrete wall of the compound, the cold seeping into her bones. He didn't speak at first. Just lit a cigarette, exhaled, stared at the night sky. Finally, "You think too much." She glanced at him, then away. "If I don't, I'll make the wrong call." He nodded slowly, like he understood more than he admitted. "Thinking's fine, carrying it alone is." She didn't answer, and he didn't push. He just flicked the cigarette away, muttered, "See you at training," and walked back inside. The next morning, Cain summoned her. No preamble, no smile, just a sealed envelope on the table between them. "Inside is your next assignment, classified. You'll deploy without the team. This is yours alone." Her brow furrowed. "Why me?" Cain leaned back, his gray eyes steady. "Because I need to know if you are what I think you are. Not with them, with yourself." The assignment was shadow work, intelligence retrieval from a hostile safe house. Not glamorous, not legendary, just dangerous enough to test whether she could survive alone. That night she slipped through alleys in a foreign city, moving with silence she once only read about in manuals. She breached with precision, retrieved what she needed, exfiltrated without a shot fired. It wasn't about the intel. It was about her restraint, her judgment, her ability to disappear into the dark and return unchanged. When she handed Cain the envelope hours later, his only response was a nod. "You passed." And then he did something rare, something almost unthinkable for a man like him. He stood, placed his hand on her shoulder and said softly, "They'll remember you, not because you shouted but because you didn't." The word stayed with her. Weeks later, on a range back home, the team gathered for what looked like another training day. Targets set, rifles ready, the kind of repetition that built muscle memory until it was bone deep. Peterson gave the signal. Each operator fired in sequence, precision cracking the air. And then it happened. Sarah stepped forward, took her position, lifted her rifle. The murmurs started quiet at first, then louder. A couple of the men smirked, ready to watch, to measure her against their unspoken standard. Even after combat, even after the mission, doubt still lingered in corners of their silence. She didn't react, just chambered around, adjusted her stance, and whispered inwardly the same words that had carried her through every impossible moment. "Don't break." The first shot rang out, target down. The second followed, perfect grouping. The third, fourth, fifth, faster now, still flawless. And then, in the span of seconds, she eliminated every target on the range. Not just with speed, with precision that left no room for argument. When the last echo faded, the silence that followed was different. Torres lowered his rifle. Peterson glanced at Cain. The other operators said nothing. But slowly, one by one, they laid down their weapons, not in surrender, in respect. Cain, arms crossed at the back of the range, didn't smile. He just watched. And when Sarah turned, he gave her the smallest nod, the kind of acknowledgement men like him rarely offered. That night, sitting alone under the stars, Sarah felt the weight shift inside her. Not gone, never gone, but lighter somehow. She had taken the shot, she had carried the judgment, she had borne the silence, and still she remained. Not broken, not forgotten, just steady. And in that steadiness, there was something larger than recognition, larger than doubt, larger than even the missions ahead. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.